Let's talk pollinators. So we're very excited to have Celeste Lebo here tonight, a longtime partner for MidCoast Watersheds Council and all the local partners around here. Tyler and I were talking her up in the back there. She's just incredibly knowledgeable about all this stuff. She's also just the kindest, best human being I've ever met in my life. So I got weepy last time. I'm not gonna do it this time, I swear. Celeste and I were lucky enough to start our conservation nursery down there at Beaver Creek when she was with OPRD. She really did all the legwork. I was just there for the fun parts. But she's bounced around a couple places since being with OPRD, worked with the Institute for Applied Ecology, and is now settled in, I think, since December, right? With the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program. So we'll have Celeste start off. She'll then hand off to Tyler Clouse, who's here from Lincoln Soil and Water Conservation District. Another longtime partner, MidCoast Watersheds Council. We've shared an office for, I think, 20+ years with the Soil Water Conservation District. Tyler will pick up and talk about the Oregon Silverspot butterfly and some of the projects that they're doing with private landowners in the South County and North Lake County area. And then you'll have to hear from me again, talking about MidCoast projects and how we incorporate pollinators. Please silence your cell phones. And a little case study from my backyard showing that you don't need acres and acres to do this type of work. I've turned a couple portions of my yard just in my free time into nice pollinator rain garden habitat. I'm going to show you some fun pictures of that. So please join me in welcoming Celeste.
Hey, thanks everybody. Let me know if you can't hear me and I'll try to speak up. I don't have a loud voice. So partnering with pollinators, as Evan mentioned, I've been really lucky in all the different jobs that I've had on the Oregon coast to be able to work as part of my work, always bring in some kind of coastal prairie restoration or meadow restoration. And of course that involves working with pollinators. And it's a very interesting component of the type of work that Evan and Tyler and I do, because it's very dynamic, very complicated, completely unpredictable. Nobody really knows how to do it. Even if you worked on it for decades, it still perplexes us. So it's one of those things where you're constantly learning, and I love that sort of work. So it's been a privilege. So I'm going to start out, I'm going to just talk about pollinators in general, the ecology of pollinators, and some and then focus a little bit on grasses and forbs, which you could also think of as wildflowers. And then Tyler's going to jump in and talk about some projects that the Soil and Water Conservation District has been doing on some properties with the Safe Harbor Agreement, and with a real focus on one particular butterfly, the Oregon Silverspot butterfly. And then, as Evan mentioned, he's going to come in with some in real life examples of how to make it all happen, and also focus on riparian species. We want to make sure that everybody knows that it's not just grasses and forbs, it's really any native plant on the coastal landscape that can be a pollinator plant. So I hope that that's something that you take home with you today. So a lot of the information that I'm going to weave into my presentation I got from these two resources, which are really great. I don't know if you've bumped into these yet, but OSU Extension has some really wonderful pollinator resources. There's, they have the bee program, the Oregon bee program, and Link Best, who's a pretty famous bee person. He works with OSU Extension now out of Corvallis, and they put together this guide. And so if you haven't found this yet, there's so much information in here, and some of my presentation will pull from that. And then the Xerces Society, if you didn't know, there's not really a state or federal agency that manages invertebrates, especially insects. Oregon Department of Agriculture does a little bit, but they're more focused on insect pests. And so there's not really a conservation group that's a government agency that's really got their eyes on insects in particular and managing them. And if anybody's has butterfly books, there's an author, his name is Robert Michael Pyle. He has a wonderful butterfly book. If you're looking for a butterfly book, his books, he has two of them out, one that he's partnered with Caitlin LeBar on. But he's an amazing author, writer, but he's also a lepidopterist and a really amazing one. And he's written some other, not just guides, but just really interesting books about following the migration of the monarchs, which is a really wonderful read. But back in the day when, you know, all of these creatures, these things that we call pollinators, if you want to group them all together, were largely being ignored. He worked with some friends of his and started this nonprofit called the Xerces Society. And they've really been on the forefront of helping people learn about pollinators and why they're important to our landscapes. And they have a couple, if you go to their website, you can see how it's spelled there. It's Xerces. If you go to that website, they have a bunch of resources, but they have one that's specific to the coast, the Maritime Northwest, and it goes through and lists all of the plants that are really great for planting if you want to attract pollinators. And it'll also talk about which plants are good for caterpillars, and which ones are good for nectar, and which ones are shelter habitat, and so on and so forth. So I really recommend that you check those two resources out. So why so much focus on pollinators? So insects in general are a conservation priority largely because right now there are really big declines in their populations. And butterflies in particular have been known to be a key indicator species for environmental changes like habitat degradation, climate change, and habitat fragmentation. So that means when you have a natural area and then all of a sudden you have a large city, paved habitat, a lot of loss of habitat, and then you have another natural area that's 20 miles away from that first natural area. And a lot of small species can't bridge that gap and get from one natural area to the other. So those populations that are left in those fragmented places become very isolated. And eventually their populations become extinct because they aren't moving back and forth with other populations. So it's a really big conservation concern for small species. And then other declines in insect populations and birds in particular have been linked to changes in butterfly diversity. And so butterflies have become a real harbinger of whether or not habitat is providing the resources that it needs and it's a healthy ecosystem, or whether or not it deserves our attention and we need to step in and try to do some restoration work. So on the Oregon coast, we don't really have very many listed insects, but one particular butterfly that I bet a lot of you have heard about is the Oregon silverspot butterfly, and it's federally listed as threatened. And then we have some other species that don't have any official listing, not even with the state through the Oregon Conservation Strategy, but they're known by people who study these species as being very rare and on the verge of extinction. And so I'll go through these individually. I have a slide for each, but just the quick facts. Coastal greenish blue is a butterfly, and I'll show you some photos of it as well. It's you probably in the spring have seen little tiny blue butterflies flying around, especially if you're around any yellow violets or violet plants, you'll see a tiny yellow blue butterfly. That's not the coastal greenish blue probably, but it looks like that. And that's another thing about butterflies. Each one of these butterflies have a look-alike. And so it's really hard, especially when they're fluttering around, to tell who's who. But coastal greenish blue is a very rare butterfly that's mostly on the south coast. There is a population that still exists in the Florence area, in the interdunal swales, when you start getting into the Oregon Dunes Natural Recreation Area, whatever that place is called. But it's host plants. So when I say larval host plant, I mean that's the plant that its caterpillar, when the butterfly lays the egg, it'll lay an egg on its host plant. And then for many of these rare butterflies, when the egg hatches and the caterpillar emerges, they can only eat one plant. And so with the coastal greenish blue, the plant that the caterpillars eat is Trifolium wormskeoldi. It's possible that they might eat other clovers, but they're very associated and even obligated to this particular plant species, springbank clover. It's a beautiful plant, and it's actually quite common on the coast. It's one of our native clovers, and I'll show you a photo, but it's got really beautiful, gorgeous purple flowers. A really lovely plant to landscape with if you can find some seed from it. And then it also nectars on just any other type of clover. The Mardon skipper is, so right now we have a lot of purple asters that are blooming, beech aster and Douglas aster. And you might see little brown hairy butterflies flying all over those purple asters. Those are skippers. And this particular skipper is called the Mardon skipper. Another South Coast species that in the Samuel Boardman area, there's still a population. And its host plant is a grass, which is pretty unusual, a plant called sand fescue. And it nectars on violets and vetches, lupin species, which are like larkspurs, if you don't know that particular name. And I should also mention on the wing, that's a really poetic way of saying that's when their flight season is. And so back to the coastal greenish blue, early in summer, June and July, and then the Mardon skipper a little bit earlier and later, May through July. And then the Silverspot, who is a species you might know a lot about already. They sometimes come out as early as late June, but July through September is when they're really out and about. And there are a few populations that are still doing well. The best population right now is on top of Mount Hebo. So in this time of year, August in particular, you can actually drive all the way up to the top of Mount Hebo. If you want to see an orchid silverspot butterfly, you have a good chance of seeing one if you drive up there to check it out. Its host plant is early blue violet. Another very robust plant. There's not much of it left in the landscape, but when you do have a chance to get the plant materials for it, it's one of those plants that'll just start growing in your driveway, or there's no, it's not a fragile plant. So hard to establish though in some cases. And then its nectar species are all asters. It really focuses on asters for nectar plants. And then the seaside hoary elfin, that's a plant closer to home. One of its historic population used to be at Driftwood Beach State National Recreation Area. I can't remember its full name, but that's a state park that's in between Seal Rock and Waldport. If you've ever stopped by there, it's just a short, looks like it's just a parking lot, and then you jump out and get on the beach. But there is much more to the park than that. And it's flies during April and May, and kinnikinnick is its host plant. And actually kinnikinnick is its whole life. It lays its eggs on kinnikinnick, the larvae eat kinnikinnick leaves, and then it nectars on the plant as well. And we do think that it also nectars on salal, but we just don't really know much about this species because the population is so small and fragile. And this year we didn't find any butterflies at Driftwood, but I think they were able to spot a few butterflies down by Pistol River. So fingers crossed the population is still hanging in there. And then Ackman blues, if you're familiar with butterflies in the valley, that's a pretty common butterfly. It's not, you might wonder why would we be talking about that as a butterfly of conservation concern. Well, Ackman blues have a coastal segregate. It's kind of, segregate is a way of saying it's like a variety or a subspecies of a plant. But for butterflies, this particular species has a coastal segregate that is right now present on the Juan de Fuca Islands up in Washington. But we also have a population down in a place called Crook Point, which is a national wildlife refuge just south of Pistol River. And we still need to do a little bit more work, but it sounds like, or it seems like that particular species might be its own unique population there. And it's flying right now. It loves buckwheats, if you know that plant. I have some photos of it. That's its host plant. And then it also nectars on those as well as lagoon species. So here's the Oregon Silverspot. This photo was taken by Sam Derenbacher. Sam couldn't be here tonight. Sam is the species lead for all of these coastal butterflies. And she's a wonderful person. If you ever have a chance to hang out with Sam, take the opportunity. You'll learn a lot and just feel uplifted by the energy she brings to her work. Up in the corner there, that little violet, that's the early blue violet. And a lot of the work that has been done on the Oregon coast to restore meadow and prairie habitat has been accomplished through funding that has come through the listing of this butterfly. So to understand, how Evan and I and Tyler decide, we get to choose to a certain extent what projects we do, but we also have to find money to do our projects. And usually money is tied to a species being listed. So a lot of fish work is wrapped around coho because that's a listed species. And a lot of butterfly work or prairie work or meadow work is tied to the Oregon Silverspot butterfly because that's a listed species. So we've learned quite a bit, but we also have lots of learning to go. If you want to see a really flagship project where coastal prairie habitat has been restored to really an amazing degree, it's a huge success, the Nestucca Wildlife Refuge. Has anybody been to that site? Yeah, check it out. And, just if you could go every month from April when the violets are blooming and then go back again in June and then even in August when the goldenrod is just off the charts. They've really done amazing work out there. And that it was a partnership between the Fish and Wildlife Service, the refuge folks, and of course, volunteers. There was a volunteer named Bill Medlin that spent about a decade, almost every day out there working on that project and weeding and spraying and planting and looking and doing it all over again, and mowing. And then the Institute for Applied Ecology was a big partner on that project as well. So if you want to see really amazing coastal prairie habitat that's been restored, that's a great place to go. And also at that site, they've been reintroducing the butterfly too. So in some places, the butterfly is no longer there. And so we know we have the habitat. So there's two zoos, the Oregon Zoo in Portland and the Woodland Park Zoo in Seattle. Both are breeding butterflies, and then we'll receive the caterpillars or the pupa in their little cocoons, and we'll take them out to the site and release them and try to keep the population numbers up or reintroduce them from the start. And one of the other spots that we're doing that is Saddle Mountain. Has anybody hiked that trail? It's a pretty intense trail, but beautiful. And that Saddle Mountain has, it's alpine meadow, so a little bit different than you would find here on the lowland in the coastal area, but again, really incredible native habitat. So here's a photo of the seaside hoary elfin, and it gets its name, if you know the term hoarfrost, because it has that powdery white on its wings. Very tiny little butterfly. There's another butterfly called the western pine elfin that flies at the exact same time, looks exactly the same when they're flying. There's like a little flash of purple sometimes you can see on the pine elfin, which separates them a little bit, but again, its whole life is spent on kinnikinick, which is a wonderful landscaping plant. So one thing I'll be pointing out as we go along is to think about the different shapes of flowers that you have in your pollinator gardens, because it's great to have as many different shapes and sizes and colors as possible, because that creates more diversity for the species. And here's the coastal greenish blue. And this is that clover I was telling you about, the springbank clover. It's one of my favorite native prairie plants. And the coastal greenish blue, when its wings are out and you're looking down on it, so it's on top of its forewings, it has a really beautiful turquoise blue. Whereas our other tiny blue butterflies, like the azure blue, would just be kind of a light sky blue. So lots of little color subtleties in these butterflies. And here's the Mardon skipper, very similar to the woodland skipper, but it also is the one that I was telling you that has a host plant that's a grass, which makes it unique. And this is the Ackman blue that I was telling you about that really prefers to, well, it's a coastal segregate. So like I was saying at Crook Point, it's its own unique population, we believe, but we're not positive. But it does prefer buckwheats, and this is a buckwheat. Now, this is not a plant that you would see. I'm trying to get that arrow out of the way. Buckwheats are not plants that you would normally see up here. You might see them on Saddle Mountain. That's a northern location, but as you travel south of Coos Bay, you'll start to run into more buckwheat plants. It's a plant that likes the drier climate. There's this really neat, just if you're interested in butterflies, look up the Ackman blue. I'm kind of stumbling right now because I'm trying. There's this really cool thing that they do with aphids, and I'm trying to pull it out of my brain right now, but I can't. So I'm just not going to try to explain it, but Google it. It's this really cool relationship they have with aphids. So it'd be a fun thing to look up. And then in addition to these butterflies that we've been talking about, there's the whole group of moths, and we just really know very little about the moths on the coast in particular. I would just say we know very little about any of our pollinators on the coast. In the valley, there's been so much more research and time spent on it, but we still have a long way to go in documenting our coastal species. And so this sweet little creature I found at that spot I was telling you about, Crook Point, it's a root and stem borer, and it's in the noctuid family, and their caterpillars are called cutworms. And this particular site is really interesting because the cutworms are soil burrowers, and there's a sandy area that's a big sandy slope that goes down to the beach at this site. And we've been pulling European beach grass in there, and every time we're pulling the European beach grass, these caterpillars are emerging out of the sand. And then all of a sudden they start burrowing down immediately back into the sand. And we haven't been able to figure out who they are, but we're trying to find one again so we can rear it and see if it's a rare species. But that's a pretty unique life strategy to live in the sand. And apparently noctuids come out at night and feed on things. So this fellow, their caterpillar, their larvae come out and feed on lupins, which is this plant right here that the butterfly is sitting on. But these other species, there's a very rare butterfly called the yellow sand verbena butterfly. And I don't know if anybody knows what yellow sand verbena is, but it's a really cool plant. If you went down to the Spit on the Alsea, where that community is, Bay Shore, thank you. There's a lot of yellow sand verbena on that beach there that you could check out. And these butterflies lay their eggs on the yellow sand verbena, and the caterpillars hatch and everything happens. And the caterpillars during the day burrow down into the sand, and then at night they crawl back out and they feed on the yellow sand verbena leaves. And apparently moths are really drawn to scent. And if you ever find a yellow sand verbena plant, smell the flowers. I just did this for the first time last week. I don't know why it took me so long. It is the most amazing lemon smell you imagine, and their flowers are very lemony color. So another cool thing to check out on Maritime. So what do pollinators need? It's pretty basic. It's just like us. They need shelter, water, and food. And when I say food, I really mean nectar and pollen. And so this all this information that I have is from that OSU extension guide and that other piece of information I was talking about with the Xerces Society. And definitely something to read about if you're thinking about putting pollinator habitat into your garden or at your house. But some really basic things is we don't often think about pollinators needing shelter. Like they seem pretty independent and got their own thing going, but they really need to be protected from the weather just like we do. And so in your yard, if you have lots of different layers of canopy, something really important is not to be too tidy. Sometimes we clean up and pick up all the sticks and mow everything perfectly and trim our hedges, but that's not actually the best pollinator habitat. A disordered, lots of leaf litter, sticks, different canopy sizes, stems, flowers, more diversity, the better for pollinators. And then also something we don't often think about is leaving bare soil exposed around our house, which is kind of, you know, we're usually always covering it up. Like we're either putting grass on it or bark chips or something, but there's quite a few bees that will need just bare soil to build their tunnels to nest. And so if you can incorporate that into your landscaping, that would be wonderful. And then water is another thing. We think about that for birds. That's pretty obvious, but pollinators also need water too. And something that I didn't really think about is that on your whatever type of water, like if you're putting out like a bird bath or some kind of water catchment, is to have a really shallow area within the water basin so that the insects can land and aren't going to drown. That is really important, and I didn't realize that was even a thing to pay attention to, so that's something to think about as well. And water is such a great feature for us to have to listen to, or even there's a whole host of plants, which we won't go into, that are species that you could put in a watery garden spot. So that would be a fun project. And then getting into food. So I'm also, this resource that I'm using is also talking about bats. I live, you know, right off of Highway 101 and busy Newport, and we have bats every night flying around our yard. I don't know if that happens at your place, and it's wonderful. I look out just as dusk, and all of a sudden I see something darting by. So they're living somewhere, and I think that's wonderful. And what I did with each of these particular species groups is highlight the place that's really important to them. So for bats, pollen is the most important thing that they're going to be keying in on, because that's what they're eating from flowers. For bees, the most important thing for bees is to have nectar guides. And I'll show you a photo of a nectar guide so you know what that means. Beetles, same thing, they're pollinators. A lot of beetles are our pollinators, but they're there to eat the pollen. That's their food source. And birds, lots of nectar, but deeply hidden within the flower. So that's a strategy that a flower might use to draw in a creature that will stick its head or its proboscis or legs or body down deep into the flower, and by doing so they'll grab the pollen and either fertilize that flower or take it to another female or male flower and pollinate that flower. And then with butterflies, nectar is the thing they're going to key into the most. Again, way down deep inside the flower. Flies, a really putrid smell. One of the first pollinators that comes out on the coast are flies. And I'm sure you all know what skunk cabbage are. And actually the flowers of skunk cabbage smell really nice. I don't know if you've done that before. The leaves, if you crunch up the leaves, you get that skunky odor. But if you get down and smell the little flowers that are on that, they call it a spadix. It's that cone-shaped flower. If you get down and smell that, it smells more like jasmine. But another thing that flies key in on is heat. And skunk cabbage have this cool metabolism, whereas, you know, they're coming out in the very early part of spring, and they generate enough heat that they'll melt. If it's in a place where there's snow, they'll melt the snow around the skunk cabbage. But even here on the coast, they'll warm up the soil around the skunk cabbage and generate this heat that draws in flies, and of course that smell as well. Moths, as I was mentioning, are just like the butterflies. They want lots of nectar, and they prefer to find the nectar way down deep in the flower. And then wind. We don't often think of wind as being a pollinator, but it is. It's a really important pollinator. And evolutionarily, plants have evolved over time, and the most recent plants are wind pollinated plants. And so grasses are wind pollinated plants. Maples are wind pollinated plants. They rely on the wind to blow their pollen off and fertilize the other populations that are nearby. So I like to call these plants the fabulous five. If you've been working on the coast and been exposed to the Oregon silverspot butterfly and coastal prairie habitat, these five plants are the plants that everybody talks about all the time. And interestingly, they're all asters because, as I mentioned before, the Oregon silverspot butterfly keys in on asters for nectar species. And I'll just go through them one at a time. Edible thistle. There's quite a few thistle species in our landscapes, and there's some tricks to knowing which one is the non-native thistle and which one is the native thistle. There's actually two native thistles. There's the short-styled thistle and edible thistle. And probably the easiest way to know if it's a native thistle is whether or not there are spines or thorns on the stem between where the leaves connect to the plant. All the other non-native thistles have a spiny wing that goes down and grows down the stem. So that's something to think about, but they can even fool people that have looked at them for a long time. So if you have thistles in your yard, Tyler, Evan, me, anybody, any of us that are always working with them would be more than happy to help you sort out which is which. Pearly Everlasting is a really cool aster. It's blooming at this time right now. And it has that papery feel in the flowers, and it's really neat if you take, and what I like to do is take a little bouquet of them. You can dry them and they'll dry like a hydrangea. They'll look exactly like they do when they're flowering, which is a nice little addition to your home, but great landscaping plant. Goldenrod, that's really the workhorse species, the plant that the silverspots absolutely love. And as you can see in this photo, I just took this about a week ago at Saddle Mountain, and there's a bee on one side and a butterfly on the left side. And everybody was on the goldenrod. This is Canada goldenrod. There's a couple other goldenrods. There's dune goldenrod, which looks really similar but grows in the sand. So that's a great species. Yarrow, you're probably really familiar with yarrow, has that wonderful smell in the leaves, kind of sage-like. And then Douglas aster, and that's a woodland skipper. Remember I was mentioning the Mordon skipper, which is really rare. This is the woodland skippers. Like I said, they look a lot alike, right? There's also a beach aster, which looks very similar to Douglas aster and fools the professionals all the time, except when it's growing right in the sand. We can sometimes always say for sure sometimes that it's beach aster, but not always. But again, these, you can look at it, even though these are all from the same family, they're all from the aster family, the flowers are all very different. And so again, this is, even if you all have plants from all the same family, you can have a lot of diversity in your flowers. I also wanted to mention that all these are perennials. So in our native prairie habitats, most of the wildflowers, or what we call forbs, are perennials. And so another way to add diversity, we do have a handful of annuals that you can also incorporate into your landscape as well, which are different. And a good way to maintain prairie over time is to have both perennials and annuals mixed up into your landscape. So just to go over a few native grasses that you might want to think about using in your restoration projects. So I know that if you're working with Tyler, Tyler's going to have a great plant list for you, and he'll recommend some species. One of the things that's really been challenging for folks that are doing this on a large scale on the coast is that we don't have access to coastal native plant materials. We can't go down to a nursery and buy 5 pounds of blue wild rye that was sourced from the coast. We just haven't developed that market yet. In the Willamette Valley, you can do that. There's many native plant growers in the Willamette Valley, and both selling wholesale and residential, you can go and buy plants you need for your yard and you're all set. But on the coast, we still haven't gotten there, and it's something that the three of us are working really hard on, along with a lot of other partners on the coast. But one of the things that we've learned through this challenge is that we found out that grasses really aren't that specific with their seed zone. And so if you did, and Evan's going to have some resources for you to look at, but if you did buy, say, coastal red fescue from the valley, because that plant grows in the valley as well, it wouldn't necessarily be a problem. And I think there's a lot more flexibility with grasses. And so these are all species that work really well in our coastal environments, do really well and disturb soil and capture the ground quickly, which is another great aspect of if you're trying to restore prairie, you want to have something that works quickly and captures the bare ground before the weeds move in. And then here are some of the wildflowers that we recommend using in pollinator habitat. And there's the fabulous 5 that I was mentioning, which we all hear about all the time. And Solidago elongata West Coast goldenrod is also Canada goldenrod. There's been tons of name changes, taxonomic name changes lately in the botanical world. And I just looked it up today because I was doing something else, another report, and it's back to Canada goldenrod. So that's easier. So that's good. Sometimes they switch back and it's all great. But what I wanted to point out with these photos is some plants that maybe you don't think about. Beach strawberry, which is a pretty common plant. It's probably maybe even weedy in your yard. This is a really important matrix plant in our coastal prairies. One of the ways that the coastal prairies work is they're knit together with this matrix of particular species that will cover the ground. And strawberry does that so well. You know, it grows flat and it covers all the bare soil spaces, but it also leaves bare soil in between its leaves, but not so much that weeds are going to move into that, but enough that a bee could build a little home in that bare soil. And of course, like all strawberries, you know, it grows stolons. And so all of those roots, so you could grab some strawberry, plant it, till it up, plant it in another spot. And usually it's very successful. Farewell to spring, that's a Clarkia. That's a great plant, Clarkia emelina. That's our native Clarkia, and it's an annual. And that's one of the plants I was mentioning. Beautiful flowers, comes up, it'll go to seed and come back again. Another one that's really great is blue-headed gilia, which I don't have a photo of, but if you're taking notes, that's a great one to think about. Western buttercup and heel-all, those are perennials, but really important keystone species in the prairie habitat. Prunella vulgaris, the heel-all plant. It's probably another plant. It's like strawberry. You find it everywhere, but I think we don't realize how important it is. And it's a native and one that we can encourage in our habitats, and also different flowers too, which that was one of the things that we're trying to encourage. And then some other plants that maybe you're not thinking about. Fireweed, if anybody's been at to Yaquina Head Outstanding Natural Area. It's an incredible fireweed bloom experience out there, and it's all gone to seed. Fireweed is a plant that blooms from the bottom to the top. And so right now, it's finally reached the top, which means the rains are returning and everything else is in seed. And it's a perennial great plant for butterflies and a really important native in our landscape. Down at the bottom to the right, Sea Watch, that's the Angelica. There's a couple species of Sea Watch. And it's in the carrot family, a plant that we haven't really talked about much, but the carrot family usually has a big spray or umbel of tiny little flowers, and those provide habitat for all sorts of creatures. And with, not just creatures that are coming in to pollinate the flowers or get nectar, but also crab spiders that are growing underneath the flowers and flies. And there's so much architecture in that flower that it creates a home for lots of different species. Oregon iris is a bulb, a rhizomatous bulb plant that is gorgeous, and once you get it established, will spread on its own. It is a plant that you would want to plant as a bulb or a plug. When I say plug, that means just a tiny, small container plant. And then Oregon sunshine. We, even as practitioners, we didn't really have Oregon sunshine on our radar for a long time for these meadows and coastal prairies because we didn't really have access to some of the really rare remnant sites along the coast. And once we've been able to really look at those sites, we're finding that Oregon sunshine is a really big component of these very rare intact prairie habitats. And it grows really well. So again, we're thinking of plants that are hardy, beautiful, lots of flower, color diversity, and structure. So just as a reminder, think about diversity as you're trying to come up with your mix of plants. Also trying to have a garden or restoration area where you have something flowering from very early spring all the way into the fall. In our area, the really early bloomers are things like violets and mustards. And then towards this time of year, the asters are singing their song. Larger plants, Evan's going to talk a little bit about this, but our larger plants are really great for that shelter component. Many of our native shrubs like elderberry and ninebark have hollow stems, and those create places for bees to nest. Variety in color, shape, and size of flowers. Try to plant, don't just put, one aster plant out in your garden. Plant 3 or 5 or 15 of them. Create groups of plants. And then preparing your site for planting is a really big part of having a successful project. And that segues into Tyler's talk really well because that's a big part of what he's been doing.
Hey everybody. My name is Tyler Clouse. I'm the ED of the Soil and Water Conservation District, and I'm gonna move on. So a little discussion map. I'm gonna talk about a little bit of our outreach and the programming that we have that is specifically for people like you, landowners, people that are interested in taking their grass areas, their lawns, and transitioning them over to pollinator habitat. We'll talk a little bit about the safe harbor agreements, which I'll go over, and kind of the first one that we've had after many, many years of planning. And then our Newport and Yachats-based habitat corridor program. And that right there is Javier. He's one of our technicians that we share with MidCoast. They do a lot of our planting, and it was a fun day out there. It was a wet day out there. So the district partners with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to get the word out about the Oregon silverspot butterfly. This pictured here is actually a demo meadow. This is before planting. That is up in Lincoln City. If any of you are up there, you can head to the Oregon Coast Community College. The master gardeners have this area in front with all of these beds. you'll see most of those pine trees are gone. We planted over 3,000 plugs there, and then we also seeded. We went back last month, and there's been some deer in there eating everything. We also learned some things about this area that were unexpected. This is, although it's kind of on top of that bluff in Lincoln City, it's more of a dune habitat. The soil there is less soil and pure sand. So some of the species we planted really succeeded and other ones are struggling. Things like the violet, the pearly everlasting, the asters are all doing really well. A few of the other ones are not, but we'll see what happens. I don't need to go into this too much because you did a great job, Celeste, on explaining who the silverspot butterfly is. This is the species that the district works on, almost exclusively for our pollinator work. We do some pollinator work with our agricultural partners. The district's main focus is working with farmers, foresters on their properties. And this is the species we tackle most. So going real quick about our two main programs, we have the Safe Harbor program. This program is to assist in transforming private landowner properties between Braze Point and Rock Creek, which are two known OSB, Oregon silverspot butterfly, OSB populations. The goal here is to create a corridor that these butterflies can go through as they're on the wing. So we want to make sure that they've got plenty of food and that they also potentially have some new sites that they can go find host plants on. So if you are within that area and you've got 500 square feet up to, we've got a project now that looks like it's going to be about an acre, reach out to me. We can help. We provide technical assistance. We purchase all the plants. We plant all the plants, and then we provide a good little guide, which I'll go into a little bit later. There's also an example on the back table that gives the landowners some understanding of what we planted and what some of the invasive species that we anticipate they need to manage for. The steps of the Safe Harbor Agreement, real quick, we talk about it. It is a 10-year agreement. The district, my organization, holds the permit with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that then the landowner signs into. It's a 10-year agreement that is completely voluntary. So at any point you could say, I really don't like how messy this looks. I don't want to do it. And you can back up it. There's some challenges with that, obviously, that we hope that people will continue. And so far people have been really gung-ho about it. But if anybody's interested in that and kind of nervous about, the implications of signing documents with the government, this is safe. And you can always pull out whenever you want to of the program. The Habitat Corridor program is actually something different that we have that is a partners program. So more of Celeste's jurisdiction there. But that program is to support both Yachats, where we're trying to, again, push up that habitat for the OSB all the way from Lane County, where we're working now, into Lincoln County and just provide a bigger corridor for these species. We currently have 2 landowners down in the Yachats area that we're working with that we're going to install meadows this year. One of them's on top of a septic field. So a space where they can't really normally use it, but flowers grow great there. So some opportunistic areas there. The other area is Newport. So in Newport, we're looking at how far does the OSB fly? And the verdict's still, we're still trying to figure it out. But about 4 miles up and down the coast, it'll go, and about half a mile inland. So in Newport, it's basically from Beverly Beach down to the North Jetty State Park. This is actually an area, the OSB isn't here yet, but we're supporting the future reintroduction at Yaquina Head so that when it happens, these butterflies can expand into that range and have pollinator resources and nectar resources for them. This one, 500 square feet up to a 1/4 acre. If there's more, it's just going to be a little bit more complex of a project and we'll have to get additional funding on that. But moving right along, Safe Harbor in action. This is, the district inherited this program from the Nature Conservancy before my time here, probably about 5 years ago. There were a few projects that kind of got going, but this is the first one in 3 years that we finally have all of our government agreements, all of our permits, and we planted it last year. So This is pre-planting. You can see that's a vacation rental right there. And they said, well, the grass is fine enough, but why don't we do something better with this? So we worked with them last year to discuss, and now there's a meandering path that people can walk through the meadow. And we've designed two different areas, a high meadow and a low meadow. So the district does include some of these different plant heights and varieties, but we like to also keep them semi-discreet, mainly for maintenance. Because we hand that over to landowners. We want to make it as easy as possible to understand kind of, here's an area where these are the specific plants, and here's another area where here, we expect these plants. Last year, we did install 3,500 plugs between the two areas, and we also seeded over 3 pounds of seed. So the two areas here that you're going to see, this area here, which we were looking in this direction from the road, gotta love the blurry aerial images. This area here is the tall meadow, and in the back here is our low meadow. In the design of this, we provide the landowners, we talk about the different species that are available to us, because that can be, as Celeste said, difficult for us to find all the things people want. And then we provide them with plant profiles. So what is the plant? How does it look? What is it like? And then some notes about it. This is helpful in the maintenance handbook so people can just see what they're actually getting and what was planted. As part of this, we also put in the back some known invasive species and species of concern that people need to watch out for and manage on the landscape once we head out. The big five are present. So we have yarrow, we seeded yarrow. It's actually not doing well, which is surprising. The pearly everlasting is really taking off, but these ones are my favorites. So we've got our aster here, Douglas aster there. This is the edible thistle, and it is just taking over, which is great. I love it there. It can grow there. It's growing about 6 foot tall. It's got these nodding flowers on it, and all of the pollinators are living at this time of year. It's a big favorite of mine. You've got the goldenrod there, and then the last one is actually Oregon gumweed, which is another aster. It makes these cute little balls that are very, very, very sticky. So we're just anticipating that's going to get thrown around the site. But that's one that we are really honing in on to try and get more of, as well as Oregon sunshine, which was planted at the site. So that's the high meadow. The low meadow, we really were simplistic with it. It's not a huge area. It's only about 500 square feet. And it was infested with copper tips, or some of you might know it as that, or Crocosmia. It has small bulbs that when we were prepping the site, when the techs were prepping the site, they dug down about 5 inches and just kept digging out worms and digging out bulbs and digging out bulbs that had to be gotten rid of before we could plant the 400 violets and the dune tansy, which are 2 of my favorite species, actually. These low meadows, the violets only grow to about 4 to 6 inches. So if we have them in these tall meadows, they often get lost or shaded out or overgrown. So we wanted to keep them separate. And the dune tansy does get a little bit taller, about 1 foot tall. We also had some different objectives. So when we plant these things in a naturalized setting, we often like to intersperse them and have some clumps of specific species. But in our areas, we also are looking for seed collection. So we plant larger, almost monocrop areas of 500 square feet of this, 500 of this. We know they're going to mix eventually. But for us, when we come back in the fall, it's really easy for us to just go collect all the asters, collect all the gumweed. The final thing that we do in these meadow handbooks is we give you all the native species that are present. You'll see some of these that Celeste had talked about. There are a few others we installed, such as snowberry and swamp rose. And I'll show you why we did swamp rose at that location. But that just, again, helps our landowners understand what the big issues are. Creeping buttercup is one, Crocosmia and English ivy were the big ones there. The challenges for these meadows, again, we provide these invasive plant profiles for landowners so you can see what the plant looks like, the copper tips, the creeping buttercup, and then recommendations for treatment. We provide all the information we can through Solve Pest Problems. There's bookmarks in the back if you want to check that out. It's an OSU extension service that's online. You can search all sorts of pests, weeds, insects, all sorts of pathogens as well. And they'll provide you with different treatment options. So whether that's manual control, chemical control, biological control, they'll give you options for all those different things. We also provide any treatment notes that we think are really pertinent, especially in areas where people may be spraying herbicide. We want to make sure that it's aquatically approved in areas, especially like this, where Bob Creek is right there. So we do make note of specific things like that, and then when to treat these species. This has been a big challenge for us, and I put that last image there because these two got handled on the meadow. There's still a few patches of creeping buttercup that are getting managed, but suddenly when you kill all those weeds, there's a seed bank. And the seed bank that we saw was sow thistle. So sow thistle, we went back to the meadow, everything's doing well. We had to bag 8 contractor bags of sow thistle to get it out of there, because once it starts going to seed, it's just gonna keep on going and going and going. So these have been really good handbooks, but we're realizing as we turn these over to landowners that there's just additional assistance that's needed as these meadows develop and change over the course of time. I don't know if this is gonna play. Looks like it's not gonna. It's a very grainy video, gotta love it. But Bob Creek, the picture on the right is actually the meadow. So we had some really, really bad rains last October, November. Bob Creek, normally you can see these rocks, it's really nice and kind of a slow moving creek, had flooded the entire project area. This creek over here, Mitzi's Creek, actually is diverted and is going into Bob Creek up here. Because of the amount of flow, it went over the culvert and completely washed out the whole site. It was a big challenge. We learned some things. We learned where water is moving on the landscape, and we adapted. We adapted by planting things along Mitzi's Creek there, such as our lupins and other species that can tolerate wet feet, but also drought conditions, because right now it is very, very dry up there. So you saw the picture before of how grassy it was and nice and neat. This is it about a month ago. It's not neat and tidy anymore, but it is abundant with pollinator resources. This whole front area you can see is all the thistles. Back here, we've got our pearly everlasting, which really goes into the asters, and this meandering path that allows people to explore the meadow, learn what they can, and enjoy it while also staying off of it. So this was a great collaboration with the landowner who said, we want people to enjoy it, but we also want to make sure that they're not treading on it and harming anything. Briefly talk about our habitat corridor program. We do have some work that, as I said, 2 projects in Yachats, and we are going to have 3, maybe 4 properties in Newport that we're going to be starting this year. This one's a really cool opportunity where 2 landowners, this woman actually used to work for an SWCD, our organization, we're county-based. So she had worked with one in another county and reached out about our programming and said, come plant it. And also I talked to my neighbors, come plant their stuff too. So we have agreements now with her, and we are getting an agreement with this landowner as well, potentially the one on the other side. So what that's going to allow us to do is, instead of having this weird line right here where like this is nice and messy and this is all grass, we're just going to be able to plant a whole landscape there and make a bigger impact however we can. The picture on the right is actually somebody whose property was ineligible for the program for a number of different reasons. They were not able to participate, but they came to our native plant sale. We talked to them. I walked the site with them real quick. And they planted this all last fall, and I got these pictures 2 weeks ago, and things are taking off. So even if you are not eligible for the program, or are in a different area, you can always reach out to us and we'll provide you with resources. And I'm going to give a plug again for our native plant sale, which is in February. Most people don't want to plant in February, but it is pushing the end of our season actually. We prefer to plant in November to December, ideally. Just to give those plants as much time as possible to get their roots in the ground so that when June comes and they have no water for 3 months, they can survive. I think that's all I'm gonna do. So I think we'll take questions at the end.
All right, back to me. So, bringing this back to what MidCoast does, when we're working out there, we've talked about our large wood projects we've done. We talked about our fish passage projects. A big part of what we do is restoring native vegetation and controlling some of those same invasive species that Tyler was talking about there. So occasionally we start with a very, very blank slate. You can see some willow and spruce trees growing up here. When we started working on this project on South Beaver Creek, that was pretty much 100% reed canary grass. Nothing good flowering there. One way to look at it is a really good opportunity to easily boost the diversity out there. The other way to look at it is a challenge. We look at it both ways. Just briefly in the kind of history of salmon restoration, 30, 35 years or so. As Celeste kind of mentioned, our money is really driven by coho and them being a listed species. We as the restoration community can get very focused on the needs of coho and kind of forget about maybe some of those other things. A lot of the thinking is, well, if you're doing good for salmon, you're kind of helping everything else out. A lot of early projects and even some restoration practitioners now, the biggest thing that coho and salmon need is wood and structure in the creek. So a lot of our plantings and riparian areas get very focused on conifers and getting conifers established for long-term shade. 50, 100 years down the road, those trees are falling in the creek and they're our source of large woody debris. So we're actually revisiting some projects that we did back in the late 90s, early 2000s that really only planted conifers. And we're adding more diversity into those past plantings. And moving forward, we add a lot more diversity just from the start. So we want to get those conifers established. We want to get that long-term bank account of trees that are falling into the creek, and that's what the salmon need. But there's plenty of room for all these other species out there, and all these pollinator species and kind of what we're talking about. So this is a project on Little Lobster. You can see it was almost exclusively cedar plants. We worked with the landowner after a year after. And started plugging in other plants and getting other diversity in there. And then that's a Upper Yuquina there, a project that was really focused on shade. We grow cottonwood in some of these areas further away from the coast, but also work in red flowering currant, twinberry, some of these good shrub type pollinator species as well. So this is to make sure you guys are all still awake. You might know some of these shrubs, like Celeste said, she kind of focused on the grass and forb, and Tyler was mostly talking about the smaller stuff. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the shrubs and some of the other stuff. You might know these shrubs, but maybe you don't know their flowers. We're gonna find out. This one's easy because it was in Celeste's.
Yarrow.
There you go, that's an easy one. So that's yarrow, nice little forb. Really good for bees, flies, wasps, butterfly, moths. I think that might be the first case I've ever heard of yarrow not doing well because it just is so prolific. It's one that you can actually mow and it'll kind of maintain a low stature too. I think if you go to Governor Patterson Wayside State Park there, they mow that grass area. There's a bunch of yarrow coming up there that it gets about 2 inches tall. It's learned to deal with that mower. It's a really nice medicinal plant too. All right, how about that? Twinberry, black twinberry, really cool plant. Lonicera involucrata, honeysuckle family. So doesn't grow like a vine, but just grows really, really vigorously. This is one of my favorite plants in my yard because it has a very long flowering period. It'll start flowering early in spring, flowers all the way up. It's still flowering now. It's one of the only plants I've seen that has both flowers and ripe fruit at the same time. So you can have robins and cedar waxwings eating the fruit right next to a hummingbird that's pollinating a flower on the same plant, which is pretty cool. Guesses? Spirea. It looks like fireweed, but this is Douglas spirea or rose spirea. people call it hardhack. It's if you've been to our nursery overlooking Beaver Creek, it's about 80 acres of this species down in those wet areas, can grow in inundated conditions. Really good for cover. Like Celeste was mentioning, it's good for pollinators, but it also gives them hiding spots. Birds love it. It's a good hiding spot for birds. And I took this picture this morning down in Yachats on the wetland trail when I was down there talking to some folks. It's a rose. Nootka rose. Kelly, you can't guess anymore. Really cool, versatile species, will grow in kind of understory conditions, can grow out in the sun. Really kind of simple 5-petal rose, not like, your really dense kind of cultivated roses, but known as deer candy because deer will eat it a lot. That's one of our challenges, making sure deer don't eat all of our plantings. But really good cover for birds, waterfowl, and small mammals as well. Ooh, you can guess. You might know the berry a little bit better. Thimbleberry. My second favorite native berry, blackcap raspberry is #1. But really good pollinator plant, can really take over an area, has these really nice big maple leaves, edible, delicious, velvety little berries.
No thorns.
And no thorns.
Leaf no fruit.
The leaves smell really good, and they're the best backcountry toilet paper. All kinds of uses. All right, any guesses? Back to a kind of a Forbes little guy. This one I didn't know growing up in Washington, and I've just started encountering it here. So this is California bee plant. Really cool one. I did not see it until it started popping up in all our restoration sites. As soon as you start clearing out some of those reaping grass, this species comes in really well. This has been growing underneath my deck and growing out into where I weed out. I don't know how it got there, probably bees, somehow, but really long flowering period, March to July, kind of the early end of spring, into the summer, and grows in a lot of different types of places, wet, dry. Let me say willow. Willow. Not a lot of people don't think, you see willow plants, you see them everywhere, you don't think about them flowering. I like to think willows, they're just they have superpowers. They can hold your bank there, they grow super quick. You can go out in the winter, cut sticks, stick them in the ground, and those will grow. They're just super easy to propagate. Say again? Willow water, a natural root stimulant that you can soak willow in water, and it helps our other plants grow when we're doing them from cuttings. I do a little warning here about what I call ODOT willow, which is the really bright yellow willow you'll see along highways. That's a Pacific willow kind of cultivar that is getting introduced a lot into riparian planting projects. It's not a native species. It's kind of a man-made cultivar. Still serves the function, but we really want to get native willow into our planting projects. Celeste was talking about how grasses, their seed sources are kind of wider. We find willow are pretty dependent on microclimates and kind of conditions within basins. So whenever we're working on a project in, say, South Beaver Creek, we're trying to collect willow from that like right around that area to get the most success. They produce a ton of pollen, so good for pollinators. And the cutest thing I've seen is a bunch of bush tits when they fly through, and they're all gray. And when they're done at the willow, they have this bright yellow face. And I've 2 or 3 times what is that bird? It has a yellow face. It can't be a bush tit. It's just full of pollen and it's super happy.
I've seen the willows covered in hummingbirds.
Yeah, and hummingbirds glean the insects. A lot of insects, pollinators and otherwise, congregate on willow, and the warblers and hummingbirds fight over the insects in my yard on the willow. This one's really tough. It's really blown up, so that's one clue. You might not even know this plant has a flower. Nope.
Stars.
Cascara, known as chittum as well. So bigger kind of tree, grows in estuary areas and in wooded areas. It has these just tiny, like ½ centimeter wide, tiny little flowers. It blooms for a long time. It has a long fruit season too, so the fruit kind of starts out kind of reddish, turns black, turn brownish black, and then it's still not even ripe at that point. You got to wait a couple more weeks for it to ripen up. But really cool kind of tree that you might not even think has a nice flower. And then this one might be the hardest. It's an aster. Coyote bush, coyote breath. It's blooming right now. I walked the estuary trail today in Newport. Aster, you think of most asters are kind of little small flowering. This is a big bush. It'll grow along estuary areas. You go up Cummins Ridge and up on these dry hill slopes, you'll find it up there. Really important late flowering pollinator. It starts blooming now and can bloom all the way into the fall and has seed. We collect seed from it into January and February. So like Celeste was talking, when you're planting your garden or planting your project, you want stuff that's flowering right away. You want stuff that's flowering through that hot part of summer, and then you want stuff that's flowering into fall too, just to give a nice spectrum of plants for these guys to use. So some resources as far as where to find this. We're a part of a couple collaboratives. One is the Northwest Oregon Restoration Partnership. It's about 70 or so groups now. We all volunteer a certain amount of hours every year and then get really good prices on restoration plants. We share that then out with landowners when we go get grants and get money to buy plants for this. We do a little bit of production at our nursery that I mentioned with Celeste. There are getting to be more seed producers with good coastal genetic stock. There's a list of them there. The highlighted one there, Oregon Coast Natives, is a cool little one started actually by Matt Smith, our partner from US Forest Service. He's got a website now that's live and he's got a lot of cool plants. His backyard looks a lot like my backyard, a little active nursery going on. But there's starting to be a little bit more energy and a little more work to get more coastal focus. When I moved here, I was looking for native plant nurseries on the coast and there was nothing. There was one up in Glenhagen Beach and I think it closed down a year after I got here. So it's kind of nice to see that. And then there's other seed collaboratives and other stuff that we're a part of that kind of provide seeds to groups like us, but not as much to landowners. So we're really working to try to boost our production, boost our seed at our nursery to get plants out to folks like you. I'm going to plug Tyler's plant sale as well. I put out early winter because I didn't know when it was February. The February coming in February, they do a pre-sale starting earlier than that usually. MidCoast and Lincoln Soil last year at the Wild Things Festival had a plant sale in May. That's what this picture's from. We're hoping to do that again. And then the Lincoln County Master Gardeners and Seal Rock Garden Club both have really good plant sales in May and June. Get out there, learn about them. People there, you don't know what you want to plant, come talk to folks there, talk to us. Just resources upon resources to get you guys what you need. And this was passed on to me from Celeste, that taxonomic thing. These names change sometimes monthly. So you might know the common name, but try to just tell them what you're thinking and then be really careful about seed sourcing. This says, Columbia Gorge will be called Willamette Valley. A lot of times the best we can do is from some of these big suppliers is a mix called hood to coast, like literally Mount Hood to the coast. So at least we get a little coastal genetics in it. Best you can do is get what seed you can get as close to the coast as possible. Really important in our world when we're restoring big landscapes and that genetic diversity, not as vital in your backyard when you're planting the little flowers here and there. But just it's going to be happiest if it's locally sourced and you're not going to be fighting it. I'll just scratch the surface. There's this idea of what we call assisted migration. So thinking about climate change and things shifting north or south along the coast, that gets really dangerous territory to kind of guess at that. Just stick with the seed stock you have. Try to get the best coast stuff. Talk to us. We know we have providers that can get you what you need. So our nursery, really briefly, there's our field of spirea there out down from the nursery. We do a pretty small scale production, pretty much the easy stuff, willow, spirea, dogwood, stuff that you can go out and cut sticks and put in the ground and keep them growing. We rely on our awesome group of volunteers, Kate, others back in the back there that do our maintenance for us and rely on state parks as well to let us work on their property. and run the nursery out there. So we have a lot of fun, a lot of opportunities once the nursery's back open to come help us out there. Propagating plants, some lupin there in the lower left in pots. Some of our volunteers working hard to weed out some of our what we call seed increase beds. We plant plants in there, collect seed from them, so we don't have to go walk around looking for seed. We have it all there at our nursery. And just a lot of hard work by a lot of good folks out there. So this is the last part. Just want to share in my free time in my backyard, my wife and I have kind of converted a lot of our grass lawn into a couple different veggie patches and pollinator gardens and rain gardens. These are actually two pictures from our Zillow listing when we bought the house back in 2016. You can see on the right, a lot of grass on our little half-acre piece there. We don't own the pasture in the back there, just to the kind of white building there. And then this, you'll see this picture again of my house. This was the front yard. Actually had bowling balls on brick pillars. But a lot of roadies. We were about a mile down the road down to Walport from Thompson's nursery, which has a ton of roadies. So I think there was 43 different types of roadies in our yard. Not bragging on roadies, love them, but not great for most pollinators. So mostly a lot of grass that we started hacking out. We moved there in September 2016. Couple more photos from the Zillow listing there, more bowling balls on pillars. And then you'll see the motorhome picture there. You'll see another view of my veggie garden. That whole grass area is my veggie garden now, which is also habitat. I'll get to that. So I started really digging into this rain garden in the front yard in 2018, March of 2018. You can see actually these are some willow stakes and dogwood stakes like I was talking about. Just go out and cut that wood, put it in the ground, hope it rains a little bit over your winter and you'll get trees growing. And it was really amazing to see how quickly this happened. So March 2018, same picture in the lower left here. July 2020, starting to fill in. Those willows are getting tall. We dug out that grass, and this is actually capturing the rain from our house and spitting it into our rain garden. Started out with some spirea starts here. You can just see them, little spindly things. This is May 2021 here. Lupin filling in, that spirea and everything getting bigger. This was last September. If I took this picture right now, you couldn't see 3 feet past the camera because it's so full. And the best thing about this is when it gets too full, I need to go cut stuff out. I'll do some this winter, go hack it out. We'll go plug those plants right into our restoration sites. Just make your own plants from your backyard. Another look here. That's we used to put out hummingbird feeders. Now it looks like a bridge and it's weird. Yeah, a really big transition from here. Thank you. Yeah, so filling in, we used to put out hummingbird feeders. Now we have so many flowering things this time of year that they don't even go to the hummingbird feeders anymore. This little area, I got the next slide about it. It's kind of tongue in cheek. We call it our California climate change garden. So my wife has an affinity for California plants. My uncle's a botanist down in Malibu, so we get a lot of California plants and we travel down there a lot. So we're actually planting some plants that aren't super appropriate here, but they're kind of cool. And again, that kind of assisted migration thought, but some cool plants that we've got in there. But here, we removed the bowling balls in that March 2018 photo, still have the concrete or the brick pillars. That's just, 4 years later, how much it fills in. And then again, this picture now, you can't even see my house, with how overgrown it is. This flowering plant here is all Pacific 9 bark. We collect seed from that every year. It's ripe right now that I go out and collect and then spread that out at our restoration sites. So before Celeste and I made our nursery there in 2018, my backyard was the nursery, and then I just can't let it go. It's still a little bit of a nursery going on there. There's again some more photos, 2018, 2022, and then 2023 there. Just filling in, and love my neighbors, but it's also a nice hedge to kind of block out and get a little privacy as well. All right, different garden here. This is the backyard. This was a little bit into it. You can see I've already planted. That was all grass along there. This is where I've planted some Some Sidalcia, some checker mallow, some lupin. We've actually kind of let the lupin, one little thing we do when we have moles in our yard, I take a little bit of seed and put seed in the molehill. So it just is creating a little open ground, and then it'll create a little patch to grow and not be grass. So let the lupin kind of escape the meadow and kind of build into the garden. They kind of have that early flowering Sidalcia, lupin then goes, and twinberry and red flowering currant will be later. And this is our California climate change garden, some California fuchsia in there, which the hummingbirds just absolutely love. This is kind of getting the idea, keep things messy. The brown in here is a Colombia, so it blooms early. It's done by about July. Leave that there. That's good cover, good hiding spots for the hummingbirds and other stuff to hang out in while they're going to get that California fuchsia. A little bit of water there. We put a big rock in the middle of our bird bath water filter to give that, or water tub to give that little shallow area for pollinators to sit on. We get butterflies sitting on the edge of it. It's like Shangri-La. Then just some flowers, nice flowers here. This is like the peak of our pollinator garden here, with the lupin and the Sidalcia, and then the aster starts blooming this time of year and really fills it in. Thimbleberry is naturally seeded in with just, if you get birds there, if you get bugs there, you'll get birds there, and then the birds will help you spread your berries around. And then we go out and actually dig those up and sometimes plant those out into restoration projects as well. And then some cool plants, that's the Colombia. Favorite flower, has these like bright blue anthers, just a beautiful plant. And just a non-exhaustive list of what we've planted in our yard. The asterisks are kind of stuff Southern Oregon and California plants that we've kind of incorporated in, just to add a little more diversity, but really working off the natives and then kind of building in some fun stuff in there as well. So veggie gardens. If you've been around me, you know I grow a lot of tomatoes, I grow a lot of peppers. I think my dad might be on the Zoom, so I'm not going to brag on him too much, but I grew up in a very orderly garden when I grew up, 90-degree angles, paved paths. I've pushed back on that and I just let things go wild. I haven't seeded chard, cilantro, parsley in my yard for 5 years. You just let it go to seed. It's the ultimate backup. If you have a good seed bank in your garden, you plant a crop that doesn't do well. Oh, shoot, chard's there now. Okay, that's fine. But let brassicas go to seed, let carrots go to seed. Carrots, as Celeste mentioned, the native carrots, I counted 15 different types of flies on one carrot head. Just for my guess, they look different enough to call them different, but just let them go to seed, let it go wild. The open dirt is huge. You'll get mason bees using that for nests. We have barn swallows that come and collect mud from those open spots. Wayne Hoffman always said, in a stream, messy equals salmon habitat. In your veggie garden, messy equals bug habitat. Plant lupin, plant yarrow. Lupin will add nitrogen to the soil, actually make your crops produce better. Marigolds and calendula, deter pests. Just mix in things, let it go. Just kind of, let it be a mess. It wants to be it. Some more pictures, parsley everywhere. Chard seed going to seed, sunflowers, anything you could ever want. That's it. So, we can answer any questions, Celeste and Tyler, if you want to come back up or answer from there, either one works. That was a lot. Any questions? Yeah, Kate.
Yeah, it'll be up there tomorrow.
Yeah, so Kate asked if it'll all be recorded online, and yes, we'll put it up on our YouTube page, the whole recording. Yep. You guys just eager to go and plant all your pollinator plants now? Good, right?
This, but Celeste, when you were talking, I couldn't help but wonder, it's probably hard enough to find the right site, the right partner. I would hope, and as you commented on, it's a listed species that you tend to be able to get while you're in there doing that one, do you, whole range of stuff. What Evan's talking about here, so that you got the listed species covered, but.
Then,
Yeah,
you
why
want
don't you come up here so they can, yeah. So Fred asked kind of, the focus is sometimes on the listed species and we're doing the work for them, but are we kind of taking that opportunity to plant everything we can in that area to kind of benefit all the other species?
Yes, most definitely. What you're talking about, we often refer to as single species conservation. And while that can be effective in some cases, it's usually not, because if you're really creating a habitat that's going to support one species, then that species is not, it's not in isolation, of course, right? It has a million other species that it depends on. And so you really have to think broadly. And so it's, especially the folks that have been involved in the Oregon Silverspot, we have a group up north that we used to call ourselves the North Range Oregon Silverspot Habitat Restoration. We had a really, long way of defining ourselves, but now we just call ourselves the Pollinator Collaborative, because that's really what we're doing, is we're creating pollinator habitat and trying to, while we're in there providing all the different specific resources that some of these rare species need, we can easily at the same time go more general and get as much diversity in there as possible. So yes, that's what we try to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the big point about me bragging about my garden here and all the things I've done is that it doesn't take, 10 acres in your backyard to do it. My rain garden is 20 feet by 20 feet. That pollinator garden is 10 feet by 15 feet. If you can make an impact, no matter what size your yard is, if you have just a back patio, you can get pots and get some flowering, some flowering things in those pots to help pollinators. Anything you can do helps. It doesn't have to be a 50-acre planting site.
And something I really love about your garden, Evan, is that, we often struggle with cabbage whites and, all the little pests that eat our brassicas and our vegetable gardens. But when you have this, when you're growing the way Evan's growing, there's plenty of food for you and plenty of food for any other species that's also eating the same thing you want to eat. So that helps with all that maintenance that you're trying to do.
Yeah, and it bugs attract other bugs and bugs attract birds. So we now have, not that I love them, bald-faced hornets that are in our garden. They're attacking some of those things that are eating some of the cabbage and that kind of thing. Bald-faced hornets, they're going after my sunflowers this year. They attack the base of the sunflower and chew it, and that's how they make their paper nests. But like you said, I plant enough for me, I plant enough for the slugs, plant enough for the deer, I plant enough for everything. And then just, don't be afraid. If you don't eat it, that doesn't mean it failed. It fed something else, and that fed something else. And even your veggie garden is doing good for habitat. Mark.
I have a question about a butterfly that I don't even think is found here in Oregon. That's the monarch butterfly. And I'm sort of curious, do any of you know, from what I understand, the monarch butterfly all migrates down to a very specific spot down in Mexico. And does anybody know why they do that? It just sort of strikes me as a really odd way to evolve.
You know much about monarchs?
No.
I don't know much about monarchs either. Tyler, do you?
I don't know much. I know that they are not on the coast. We do not plant them specifically, because a lot of the nectar that they require, the milkweed is just not here in sustainable enough patches to support the population. So we try to focus on others.
Michael Files' book, I think, is
Yeah,
Chasing Monarchs. He goes the whole migration route. So those are great books.
So yeah, Michael Pyle's book there that Celeste mentioned, that'd be a good one to check out. Yeah, we don't know much about it. We don't have them here on the coast. I think there are populations in the valley. But yeah, they're it's what we call a sink, population sink, that if we attract them here, they might come here, but there's not enough to really keep them going. So we might actually be hurting the population by encouraging them to come here. That's what I've read. Okay.
Fun fact about monarchs.
And I think this is true. I think it's a fact.
They migrate
very long distance. I don't know whether it's 2,000 miles, but it's somewhere in that vicinity. It's a long, long ways. And as I understand it, there's no single butterfly that makes even the whole trip there. Multiple generations, how does that work?
It's mind blowing.
I mean, it's not like geese that go, okay, follow me, I know the route. Because nobody's ever done it. They're changing their different generations.
That's
They're
right.
making the entire trip.
That's really cool.
It's incredible.
So for the Zoom people, we were talking about monarchs and none of us really know that much about it, but Fred says they're really cool. They tag team their migrations all the way to Mexico. All right, I think we'll wrap it up there.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.